So now here are the TE signals. So again, the general overview difference between FE and TE is that FE has a warm and coordinated articulation, and TE has a blunt, uncoordinated articulation. And what we mean by warm was that swelling pattern we saw in the diagram, and what we mean by blunt is the plateau pattern that we see in TE. This can also be illustrated from another angle here. For example, notice the head shaking. I'm going to try to imitate that here using a brush tool. Now notice that there's an even spacing between the dots and there isn't too much density anywhere. Well, there is some density in the edges of transition. For example, when the head is starting to move from one side to the next, from left to right, it does tarry a little there, but otherwise the velocity remains quite consistent. Now in contrast, if I try to imitate the movements of Oprah Winfrey here, using the same tool, this is what I get. Now as you can see, there's points of density and then velocity, but there's a smooth transition between the two as it constantly glides in and out of acceleration and deceleration. And this matches the movements of the hands here that have a little bit of that warm embedding. For example, here this hand, it takes a while to hit. It prepares, so here it's going up and then back up. So there was that beginning, middle, end. And so beginning, middle, end. Next we have TE2, which is Sassy Emphasis. Now as I discussed previously, the qualities of plateau velocity and Sassy Emphasis are impossible to identify without piggybacking on a certain vector choice, even though they themselves are not the vectors. So for example, it might utilize a head shake or a hand gesture, but plateau velocity and Sassy Emphasis are not themselves tied to any particular limb. And to demonstrate this as clearly as I can, I want to use this GIF here. Here we see what is, in my opinion, the closest we can isolate just the Sassy Emphasis without anything else. Notice the head shaking. There's a bit of a sassy wobble there. It does like a little figure eight. In this particular case, I would not even count this as a head shake. This is simply Sassy Emphasis. So if you see this pattern of movement where there's a bit of a curvature in the vectors of the JE angularity, then that's when you know it's Sassy Emphasis. By contrast, these two also have Sassy Emphasis, but unfortunately they're not pure examples of it. They also have head shaking. So you see how the sassiness creates these zigzags and the swirls. Now these are not at all like the PE gestures, which create body sways and a general relaxation. Notice the difference here. The activity of PE is relaxed, and it's in that very looseness that there's head tilting and body swaying. There's a playful casualness to it, whereas with TE, there's an expedient, rapid, jagged element to these curvatures. These curvatures are not the kind of curvatures where you let your body go loose and just swerve around aimlessly. No, it is actually very targeted and it's very contained. So the entire Sassy Emphasis from start to finish is rigid. The torso and head are not loosely swaying or anything. They are actually jittering, and they're jittering in a rather asymmetrical way. So that's the difference between the TE sassiness and the loose body swaying that comes with PE. Next we have taut square cheeks. As we discussed, this relates to the squareness of the mouth caused by the levator and depressor muscles, which are the ones activated with FI, pulling in both up and down directions, causing this mouth to take this shape. And we discussed how this can also extend all the way to the jawline, to where the entire contour of the jaw appears itself to be a square. And we contrasted this against FE, which has a more curtain rising effect to the sides, and the bottom side of the face does not have those 2 points of emphasis. So these 2 bottom pull corners, which together complete the 4 points, are what will be lacking in the FE smile, which will have just these 2 upper points, but it won't have the bottom 2 pulling from the depressor muscles. Which leads us into TE4, which is horizontally split cheeks. Now that very same action of the taut square cheeks will also create a splitting of the cheeks in the middle in some cases. It reads here, the cheeks are split horizontally down the middle when they smile. Here's the middle, here's the splitting. Due to the upward and downward muscular pulling into an H-shape smile. The idea of looking for that H shape has been really useful. So we mentioned the 4 points. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and then there's the horizontal slice, which together creates an H shape to the mouth, which is in contrast again to FE, which has a more U shape to the mouth in how it moves. Like here, this is a U shape. This is not always present in every TE user, but when it's there, especially in conjunction with the TE taut square cheeks, it's a pretty solid indicator of a TE psychology. Next we have TE5, nasal monotone voice. The voice becomes pinched, nasal, and monotone, as heard in the video above.
You know, you've probably seen it or may have played it previously. I think that the most interesting thing about Halo 4 is that it comes from a new developer, so it's not from Bungie. And Bungie had done Halos 1 through 3, ODST, then Reach, and kind of handed over the reins to...
So the difference in the voice is something like this. I'm going to say part of this phrase in my own voice and then try to copy this TE voice. The most interesting thing about Halo 4 is that it comes from a new developer. The most interesting thing about Halo 4 is that it comes from a new developer. Okay, obviously I can't completely do the TE voice because it's not natural to me, but I hope that demonstrates a bit of what it sounds like. Next we have TE6, which is Sassy Headshakes. Now as we've seen, this has a headshake embedded with some sassy emphasis, which means it doesn't just move in a straight left to right fashion, but it has an edge to it, that swerve, that sassiness. And we can see it here to where in this GIF, he doesn't just go left to right, he hooks and swerves. And that hook and the swerve is the sassiness embedded within the headshake itself. You can see here in Shapiro, where when he goes and does the headshake, he actually yanks off to the side in an asymmetrical way. And that extra addition of the sassy swerving is what differentiates it from the FE gesture. And we see this here as well with the head shaking. The head shaking also has that miscellaneous element in its trajectory. But this is actually even more clear in this GIF right here, where we see this shovel chin head push at the same time as there's like this sassiness. So notice how there's a little bit of micro rattling and swerving action happening as she drills in that head shake. We see it here in Mike Huckabee again, right around there. See how it kind of looks to the side while his chin kind of takes a yank to this side? That asymmetry is also in the head. Those sassy shakes are also parts of the asymmetrical expression pattern of the TE-FI oscillation. So this is what is meant by uncoordinated. Now notice all of these people are gesticulating, they're trying to get a message across, and yet the presentation of the body as a whole is not, let's say, targeted and synchronized. For example, the head is pushing, but the hands are not necessarily unified in where it's pushing or in the vector of the push. So the sassiness of the head may not match, like let's say, the quality of the hand. So if there's a hand chop, if there's a projection hand, the sassiness of the head shake may not match the projecting hand in, let's say, the rhythm of the two. And that's what's meant by the uncoordinated aspect. It doesn't mean that there isn't an attempt to give presentation. That's not the same as what I mean by uncoordinated. Uncoordinated just means that the expressions that are giving the presentation themselves are not of uniform variety in vector and velocity. The same exact thing could be said for sassy shoulder shrugs. So we see here in a volunteer how the shoulder shrug is accompanied by a bit of a sassy shake of the head. And here too we see how the shoulder moves up here in the shoulder shrug as there's sassiness going on here as well. Okay, now we have TE9, and this is actually a new signal discovered in the last couple of years, which is the bear-like hands. We've been calling these sometimes the FI claws, and this is in contrast to the quality of the TI hands, specifically the puppeteer hands. So in the puppeteer hands, what we see is that the wrists are bent and the fingers are stretched out, and the fingers move rather independent of one another in kind of spidery forms. With bear-like hands, we see a kind of opposite pattern. The hands remain stiff at the wrists, with the fingers slightly opened and uniformly curved inward at the fingertips. So the fingers themselves are more or less still all operating together, and they're spread apart, but also the bend is happening at the final phalanges here. At the tips, they're curving in, making this kind of claw-like gesture with the hands, while the wrists remain stiff. So when TE-FI users are gesturing with the hands, they're more inclined to adopt this shape pattern to the hands. And lastly, we have TE10, which is avalanching articulation. The articulation avalanches forward without intermissions, often drowning out other voices. So this refers to the way that TE not only gesticulates, but articulates with such a plateau velocity and continuity that it basically bulldozes forward without really taking a break or pausing in between. So because form swelling has a beginning, middle, and end, and because TI has a kind of a stop-start nature, the FETI oscillation tends to have more of a pacing to what it says with, let's say, sentence stops and pauses and commas. And by contrast, the TE pattern of articulation lacks some of these elements.
Their minds are like jello. They know nothing. They've not been trained in history. Okay, they have absolutely no structure to their minds. Their emotions are unfixed. Okay, so it's in the banality of contemporary cultural criticism. Okay,
Me at Berkeley. Yes, it's an elephant and an elephant. That he's going to put y'all back in chains about black people. This stuff pre-existed. Donald Trump.
But that didn't come from
saying that Mitt Romney.
Now, this articulation style can be very effective when debating. And indeed, many TE users are very good at debating, whether it is in law or in politics, because of the way that they can just avalanche forward with their speech without giving other people as many entry points for interjecting. Alright, and that summarizes the TE signals.